Hi, I'm Piero. I'm going to talk about DROs. So how I found what I'm going to respond to is I simply searched for dispute resolution organizations and Molyneux. Molyneux, whatever. And for the Stefan Molyneux guy, who's now one of these guys, evidently we're being told, has answered all the questions we ever have in our idiot heads about market anarchy. Now, for those of you who don't know, the idea of a dispute resolution organization is the idea that in order to secure your rights when you make a transaction, there'll be a dispute resolution organization market where you can hire basically arbitration. So everything will be done through arbitration. Now, the ironic part of this, of course, is that arbitration in our culture, which is on the rise, has been on the rise, and is a good idea in a lot of cases, does rely on the fact that if arbitration fails, that there still is a justice system. And so this is really the first problem that you ought to be thinking about in the criticisms of your market anarchy, and specifically on the DRO side, but also other things, which is you can put something like a DRO in place to say, look, a standard. But the problem is, what if there's this dispute between DROs? What if there's a dispute between a private party and its DRO? Who resolves that dispute? A DRO? And it's a matter of, there's an inductive, you guys love logic so much, right? So you'll understand that it's an inductive argument that basically any DRO you need will also need a DRO. And then those DROs at that level, we need another DRO. And it's an infinite transgression unless at some point there's a final system. It's just like our system of courts. Mostly you don't need to use the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court has to be there for when your court fails to get satisfactory resolution, specifically in difficult cases. In non-difficult cases, you would have no chance of getting to the Supreme Court. The lower courts would be able to handle it. Okay, now I'm going to go through this article and that I've done. Now, I put the link over there. I told you how I found this. It's called The Stateless Society. The section on dispute resolution is just one section, and that's where I'm starting. Okay, it starts off again with this classical people are amazingly stupid way of starting off his arguments. The fact that people still cling to the belief that the state is required to resolve disputes is amazing, since modern courts are out of the reach of all but the most wealthy and patient. Wrong. The most wealthy do in fact have a huge advantage in our legal system. Without our legal system, they have an even bigger advantage. In market anarchy, they would have an even bigger advantage. But I agree, of course, they have a big advantage. But they are not the only ones. There's an awful lot of unsupported hyperbole in market anarchy, and I think it probably comes from Randianism because of her cocked up, screwed up idea of objectivity. So they love to go ahead and put things black and white. The fact is that powerless people are protected in our system every day, and not enough, and not in a fair way, just more fair than if you had no justice system at all. Okay, so he goes on here. How can the free market deal with the problem of dispute resolution? Outside the realm of organized crime, very few people are comfortable with armed confrontations, and so generally prefer to delegate that task to others. Let's assume that people's need for such representatives produces dispute resolution organizations, which promise to resolve disputes on their behalf. All right, well, this is just a little karate chop of his to take out organized crime, except for organized crime. Okay, I'll repeat this. The reason the concept of a reformed state works, an infrastructural state, works, is because most people are against violence. So through the state, they can band together and have codes put on the use of violence. We would love to prohibit violence, general, those of us that are pacifists or sympathetic to pacifism. But the fact is, nobody's figured out a way to truly say that there can never be any violence. Somebody murders you, then we have to take them by force and put them in jail. That's a violent act. Nobody has proven a way to get around that. So he says outside the realm of organized crime. This is the minority. but they're not non-existent. Why is it outside the... We're going to make a social system, but we're going to put it outside the realm of organized crime. We're just going to pretend organized crime doesn't exist. So they won't be using DROs. They'll just be screwing you around, set up DROs that are corrupt and all kinds of games. But we just won't consider that. You know why? Because we have no answer to that. That problem resolves an actual standard of justice. To give you an idea of how the DROs work. Okay. Thus, if Stan is hired by Bob, they both sign a document specifying which DRO they both accept as an authority in dispute resolution. If they disagree about something and are unable to resolve it between themselves, they submit their case to the DRO and agree to abide by that DRO's decision. If I, an individual with very little property compared to a giant corporation, a $200 billion a year corporation, which, yeah, I've worked for a $200 billion a year corporation before, if I signed onto that company, I'll tell you what would happen. I would be able to choose the DRO that they used, and they would have some sort of a reputation. But, let's see, who are they going to be more responsive to? The 150,000 employees, or the people that have contracted them to be the DRO for their company? Well, all employees could unionize, and then perhaps they'd have an equal say. Oh, but wait a second. What's the power of a union in market anarchy? Nothing, because they have no property to secure their rights with. Now, he says, it's at this point that people generally throw up their arms and dismiss the idea of DROs by claiming that society would descend to civil war within a few days. No, not within a few days. Again, hyperbole. You know, it would probably take months. Well, you know, it would be days, but not because of the DROs. If DROs could somehow be put in place in a working system, it would take longer than days for them to fall apart. On the other hand, if you did declare that this was the new system and there was no law and everybody should get a DRO, yeah, you know, it wouldn't even take days. It'd be riots instantly, probably. But anyway, that's just a cultural thing. That's not an argument against market anarchy, because I'm an incrementalist. And if market anarchy can work, then as far as I'm concerned, what we're looking for is a way to incrementally go in that direction. But look at this. After that sentence, he says, everyone, of course, realizes that civil war is a rather bad situation, and so it seems likely that the DROs would consider alternatives to armed combat. Everybody, huh? Well, there's more hyperbole, and it's funny hyperbole. This is where you really find all the hyperbole. Everyone realizes, wait a second, let's just stop and look at the world and see. There's civil war there. Does that not hint that maybe not everybody thinks it's a bad situation? I mean, there's people consciously and willfully entering themselves into the situation of civil war. So not everyone realizes it's a bad situation. So he's going to go on from this as if it's true, and it's not. They basically think that what will happen is what he thinks, Stefan Molyneux thinks, or Molyneux, I really don't know. Tell me how it's pronounced. Not that I really care, but that basically it's like credit reporting. I mean, if you were to violate your DRO, then it would hurt your credit rating. But if I'm an employee of a $200 billion corporation, I have a dispute with my company that's going to cost them $2 billion to satisfy, you know, to raise everybody's wages or pay some penalty that that they're supposed to pay according to their contract. Well, I have to go to the DRO. They're going to decide if their contract credit is going to hurt more than the $2 billion. And it won't necessarily. Why? Because if they save themselves $2 billion and that's all they have left, they lose everything else, but they've saved just the $2 billion that they saved by violating their contract. Do you think that they're ever going to be able to hire anybody again? With $2 billion, do you think there's anybody out there that's going to say, well, they've said they've changed their ways, you know, they've got a new DRO, it's a new CEO, and you know, I haven't worked for a year and my family's starving. You think people will, listen, if they have $2 billion of capital, they will be able to spend it. That's capitalism. Capital is value. Other people are not going to ignore value, not because you're corrupt or any other thing. They might resist dealing with you, but someone will still deal with them. They have to just make a guess. Is it better to save the $2 billion and still try to get people to work with them with their hurt reputation, or not? And the thing you also have to realize is it's not like they have to accept their hurt reputation.